Day has sprung. It's a beautiful day out. Thank you for spending it inside. I'm going to ask you to please quiet your cell phones if you can. What do ultra-processed foods, vaccines, peanut allergies, and marijuana have in common? They're all on the list of words that are now banned from federal websites. Just want to throw that out there to make sure we're keeping language alive at the Visiting Writer Series. Say the things you want to say while you can still say them. Lots of events coming up in the Visiting Writer Series. We have a busy spring. I just want to give you a preview of upcoming events. Next Wednesday, April 16th in Haggerty Lounge, we're pleased to have our first ever undergraduate creative writing showcase, in which the first graduates with their BA in creative writing from here at St. Mary's College will be reading from their capstone projects. Next Wednesday, Haggerty Lounge, 2:30. Next Thursday in the library, Pause for Poetry, just in time for National Poetry Month. And speaking of National Poetry Month, we are delighted today to welcome an amazing poet to our midst, Danusha Laméris, and it is my great honor to introduce Robin Shellens, who will be introducing Danusha.
Okay, everybody's a little bit taller than me, so this is okay? Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, it's my pleasure on this beautiful Danusha Laméris poem type day to introduce Danusha Laméris to St. Mary's. She's the author of 3 full-length collections of poetry, The Moons of August, Bonfire Opera, and most recently Blade by Blade from Copper Canyon Press. To read her work for me is similar to when you're walking and you suddenly have to stop and slow down because you've heard something. Her poems both alert us to the presence of something remarkable immediately while inviting us into their rhythm and their way of seeing, letting us know there are other beings warm and alive among us. Populated with California's special beauty, and sometimes its literal fruits, like in You Pick Orchard, they call us to smells, colors, space, and scale that we might otherwise miss. Through this attention, we're always brought back to ourselves, the fullness of the world, which doesn't just include its beauty, but also its debris, its grief, its loss, its pain, its wonder, its nostalgia, and the relationship with time that we have, the brief time we have on this planet. Of our sources of suffering and pleasure, Danusha says, one wounds us into another, and the endless flow of this is tangible in her works, which are, to quote one of her poems, luminous, ordinary, and acute. Danusha is a recipient of a Pushcart Prize and honored with the 2020 Lucille Clifton Legacy Award. She served as the 2018 to 2020 Poet Laureate of Santa Cruz County, California. And you can find her work in the Best American Poetry, the New York Times, the American Poetry Review, the Kenyon Review, Poetry, and many other places. And her poem, Small Kindnesses, has been translated into multiple languages, inspired a film, and was recently performed by actress Helena Bonham Carter. Please welcome Danusha.
So good to be here. Thank you for having me, and yes, thank you for spending this time together on a sunny, gorgeous day. And Robin, I just loved the things that you said about paying attention, and especially about paying attention to things that we don't normally notice. Because I'm thinking that's so much of the job that we have as writers and poets, and I assume I am amongst many writers and poets here, that calling our attention and to the places where it needs to be, including banned words. I just went to the website to cut and paste the words that are now banned on federal websites, and I put them in a document so I can use them for writing prompts. So that's my tip of the day, is the banned word poems. Can we make that a thing? And have fun doing it. We gotta find our fun where we can, really. Meaningful fun. All right, let me get myself set up. This mic is almost too good. It's like if I do anything, it's going to pick it up. It's pretty amazing. Get myself organized. I'm a little bit dyslexic, so I always have to write things in a way that will help me know my time. Okay, good. We're running right on time. I like to start with a shorter poem, and this one is called What Begins. And I've been thinking a lot about how things begin and how they end, and what a beginning might tell us about an end. I don't know why I've been thinking about that, but obviously so many reasons. We want to begin again, especially now, I think. What begins? What begins in beauty ends in beauty. What begins in sorrow ends in sorrow. The seed once planted, soon in full bloom. If grief, then grief. If anger, anger. They say the first week of any love affair reveals its end. Give me the child at 7, and so forth. The world itself began with a bang. Hard to argue for another truth. But I have seen a heart worn thin take to small repairs. Have watched a blue jay born wild eat out of a woman's hand. And even we began as tadpoles, curled and gilled. I want to think the starting place is only one location on a curve that we can follow to another end, and then begin again. Thank you. A little tiny backstory on that. I was talking years ago to my friend's son, who was about 3.5, and I told him, did you know that when we were in our mother's bellies, we had gills? And he listened really attentively, and I was explaining the biology to him because he was into biology. And then when I was done, he went running through the house and yelled out to his mother, "Mom, Danusha had gills." I just love that so much. I was like, hey, don't single me out, dude, not just me. I grew up very close to here. I lived up in these hills between here and Berkeley, and we actually lost our home in the big fire of, I don't even know what year that was, like 91 or something, the firestorm. And there's a little hint of that in this poem. So the fire I refer to toward the end is that fire. And yeah, so it's kind of a local tinge here. Glass. It's the small things that haunt. Oranges. Because my mother used to peel them for me, slip the rough sections in my mouth. Luckies. Because of the wayward boy who lit my first, leaning against the railing of the pier, O Sole Mio wafts up from the downstairs apartment. Now it means all those summers. Can't they just turn it off? I walk through Queen Anne's Lace in late September down to the cove where I used to meet a man who was dying. That flower now in my own vocabulary of loss. What doesn't, in time, enter grief's lexicon? When I think of our house after the fire, all I see are pools of pink glass, once our ice cream bowls, melted on the ruins. Thank you. When I was in summer camp, we called that clam claps. It's just snapping. Or were those clam claps? I don't know. We had all these little waves. But that's one of the joys of reading poems live to people, is that feeling of just we're breathing together in one room. and we're sighing together in one room. And I think especially now, the way I'm holding it anyway, is every day is its own kind of mountain to climb. That begins with maybe your first glance at the news, that begins with the first worries and fears. And so I'm seeing every day as that mountain and kind of asking myself how I'm going to climb it. And one of the ways I've been climbing it is with words and language and just remembering how it brings me back to the present again and again. And now for another poem of disaster. My friend Diane is here. We went to high school together, close by, and we also went to college together. And no sooner did we arrive than there was a giant earthquake, the earthquake of '89. So it was very significant. We were at UC Santa Cruz. It took down most of the downtown. And I wrote this poem recently-ish while sitting in the location where I knew there used to be another building, and I was remembering what happened there and what has happened since, and thinking about how we walk through those mountains of grief, disaster, loss, all those things. But how do we do that? Construction. I remember downtown after the earthquake, piles of rubble, metal gates set up to corral us in the middle of the road so we wouldn't step on all that broken concrete, on pediments fallen from doorways, makeshift memorials to people who died under the debris. Sometimes you'd pass a building's facade held up with beams, the rest of the structure gone, an empty lot visible through the blown out windows. I know that place. That's saving what I can. Okay, I lost my house, but I'm alive. Or okay, my brother died, but I'm living twice. No, 3 times. For me, for him, and for my son. I saved the front of the building, its delicate arches and raised friezes. I didn't hate it. You could still buy socks or get coffee in these giant tents that popped up in the ruins. That's aftermath for you. The way we keep on drinking out of little paper cups, walking through disaster in our brand new shoes for everyone who can't. Lava. I kept hearing stories from people who encountered really dangerous situations in nature, but didn't do the safety things they knew they should have done because they were too entranced. And I thought that was so interesting. And I kept hearing those stories, and so I wrote a poem about it called Lava. Has anyone hiked a volcano? Or, oh my God, a surprising number of yeses. What have I been doing with my time? Okay, that's interesting. Wow, I'm gonna ask people more questions when I'm reading. Okay, lava. Once 2 women hiked a volcano, stood on the lip and watched the fire move in the crater's mouth. Neither spoke. Not even when the ground began to shake and they felt the rumble through their souls and up their legs. They just stood there, eyes fixed. Later, both admitted the truth. Each fought an urge to leap. What is it we could give our lives for? A mountain? A fire? A view from the cliff? Every year on the coast where I live, tourists die, amazed by the Monterey Bay, swept from the shelf of rock overlooking the waves. And farther north, some people get so close to grizzly bears, they end up taking their stories with them into the darkness of the animal itself, surrendering to its life of fur and forage, to lumber through the woods at night, becoming, at last, a gorgeous, insatiable beast. Thank you. I don't know how my neighbor didn't make it into that poem, but we lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains in a place where we had to cross a bridge to go get our mail. And one day when I was doing that, the neighbor told me that, I don't know, in the past week, she'd been crossing the bridge and saw that there was a mountain lion looking at her on the other side of it. And that's when I asked her, did you do this thing and make yourself really big and yell? And she said, no, it was too beautiful. Let's see what else. How often one death carries another. Like when my painting teacher Eduardo died, and the cat he'd had for years succumbed the same month to the same rare ailment. Or how when they buried my friend's grandfather in Japan, the pond full of koi he tended all his life sickened, turned belly up. Who or what is in our keeping? A house unoccupied quickly sinks into itself, turns earthward. Long married couples are known to give up the ghost within hours of each other. Think of the hum that holds the walls together. The roof high keeps the rot at bay a little longer. As surely we too are pinned here by others, whose presence urges our cells to replicate our lives more bound than we imagine. Even the woman I can't see, who lives in a studio on the other side of the wall. She washes a dish, and the water runs through the pipes between us like blood through the arteries of a single heart. I think so often when we're writing to find our way back to what we're connected to, or might be somehow connected to. At least I find that. And I'd love to hear more when we're in the discussion part if people want to share things about what pulls you to the page. Don't be shy about asking questions. I was telling Robin that I'm really an open book about questions, whether they're personal or more about craft. But I think that we need each other and the solace and agitation, both, that writing brings so much right now. All right, and I'm reading through this much wrinkled and turned new book that I'm just still learning my way around. And I think we have copies back there if anybody wants to buy books after I think I have Bonfire Opera and Blade by Blade back there as I am remembering it. Oh, here's a poem that just fell out of the book. That's not published in it, but this poem is about how, don't you feel like you have lived often several lives within your life? I see, okay, a lot of nodding. My mom used to say, I think I've lived 5 lives. She was a scientist who ran a lab at UCSF, but for some time she'd been almost a nun in London, and she would have been a nun, she said, except Anglicans don't cloister. So that's interesting. And then there she was with 2 kids, and living in Berkeley and being a scientist. So that's sort of what's underneath this poem, is thinking about all of the selves that we become and discard and grow out of and all of that. It's easy to forget where you've been because something happens then ends. Then something else happens and you forget what came before. You know how it is. Once you ate apples on the back porch, tossed the cores into the wet grass. Once you rode horses to a lookout high in the mountains into the underbelly of sky. Remember so-and-so? Remember when it used to rain in winter? Remember when you wore your hair short, dyed pink, pierced your ears all the way up the rim? You were someone else, who had also been someone else. And who will you be next? Today I walked down the beach holding hands with a man who used to be a microscopic dot. Now he has a beard and plays guitar. I was microscopic too, but now someone says, Danusha, and I say, yes? Temporary. One day they will say cloud, and I will turn my head, not head, in answer. Thank you. Maybe just one more. Does that feel about right? Okay. I'm a person who can't take in a lot of poems when I'm listening to them. I have kind of a limit, ironically. Poetry is my life. But I always assume others are the same, that there's a certain amount we can take in and then an amount that we can't. I think that's how it is. What do I want to read? Okay, here's a little poem for people who reverse their letters when they're trying to write, the way that I do. And I also read headlines in a much more creative way than what has been written, which is kind of a relief sometimes to read my alternate headlines. This poem is called Regret, but the R is in parentheses. I see the word egret, but read instead regret, a trick of the mind, its reversals. One, a white slash rising from the marsh, the other a stone strapped to the heart. The way I've carried all the would haves, all the ifs, each alternate exhausts. The egret wades in the dark water, seeking fish. The heart, constancy. I doubt the egret has regrets. Hatch, fledge, breed, hunt. And besides, a lovely name that comes from French, aigrette, for brush, after the long feathers that stream down its back. How do its legs, bent reversed, move ahead? Who wouldn't want to walk like that? There are days I step outside my body, arise, fly over the field of my life, and glimpse not error, but river, rock, and oak, a wide expanse. Here and there a meadow, dry grass dotted with, could they be poppies? Some bright blurred orange flame. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about how our dogs love poetry. I can tell when a poem is working like rhythmically because because the dog will just like fall asleep, you know, but in a very contented way.
That's the best.
Yeah. I don't know how should we. I guess I'll just ask the question and pass the mic to you, and then. I love the way that you open it up, like to invite people in. So maybe we'll do a longer like discussion session and have people just, you know, tee off. But yeah, I loved getting an opportunity to read so much of your work before this because it reminds me. You know, you opened your new book with an epigraph from Dorian Lux, who taught here last semester. And is a character and a wonderful person. But she talked, what I took from her writing, which maybe you've heard from her before, is you want to incorporate like a triangle, like physical, emotional, intellectual. And I think when I read your work, I also think spiritual, because the way that the rhythm of your work, like you're bringing in so many things that I can see. I'm like, it's like breathing fresh air. But there is a level of everything being tied together in an emotion that's always under the surface that's really, staggering, actually, and overwhelming. So I'm curious how you feel when a poem is coming to you and you compose it, like how you create this kind of work, just in general, and then maybe more talking about like the craft elements or revision, or if you're looking out the window, it just comes to you. I know it doesn't happen. Not this.
Well, again, thanks for asking that. That's a really interesting and layered question. And it makes me think about back to the first grade or in grade school, the thing I would get in trouble for was staring out the window. So it's always been a favorite activity. But I'm a big believer in something that another mentor and friend has said often, and that's Naomi Shihab. And she says, your life is the poem. Your life is the poem. And she says it very emphatically, as only Naomi can. And I have come to understand more what that means. The poem comes from how you are living and seeing, and then invites you into the next broader level of seeing and experience. And so the poem is the time that you're spending looking out the window at the trees. The poem is the time that you are asking yourself important questions. The poem is your grief and your suffering. It's all of those things. And then, if you're lucky, while you're in the middle of washing dishes or doing something else, there's a line. That's my experience, is that usually there's an opening line. Or, often it's a statement, sometimes it's a question. I have a poem called Nothing Wants to Suffer, and that came from reading the wonderful poet Linda Hogan, who writes essays, and she wrote an essay in which she was addressing a field of corn. And in it she says, nothing wants to suffer. And that gave me that poem feeling of, I have to talk about that. So I think that's my longish answer to that. Your life is the poem. The poem comes from your life.
Thank you. And and it's also a huge part of your life, specifically in California, Northern California. Do you ever, when you're wandering around, do you feel equally inspired by other places, or is it just like your poems remind me of why we live in this horribly expensive corner of the world? Because my mom will ask me and I'm like, well, why do I live in San Francisco? And I'm like, because of the nature? And I'm like, God, that sounds so dumb. It's a city. But there is just something about the way that nature and culture here weave together that I feel really strongly in your poems. How do you feel that, that influence and the rest of the world? Do you think you could move somewhere else and feel equally inspired?
In a word, yes, to that last part, but I think it would be hard to transition. I think that my heart and soul are really here in the way the grass turns yellow in the summer, and then this lush green, and the oak trees, and especially the redwood trees. I've written an essay about the redwood trees, and I think we all have our kind of spirit tree. People talk about spirit animals. Why don't they talk about spirit trees? That we have our trees that we're close to in some way. And I wrote the essay realizing that I have that with redwoods. It would be hard not to live near them. That would be a big transition. And my mother is from the island Barbados, and for her it was the casuarina tree, which is like a type of pine that has drooping needles. So it has a willow-esque kind of shape to it, but it's a pine. And she moved to Half Moon Bay, where it's, of course, constantly foggy and cold, and yes, and beautiful and amazing out there. And she tried to grow a casuarina tree. It was the saddest thing I have ever seen. It had like 2 little needles on it, you know, it was just really sad. Sometimes a hummingbird could land on it, that's about it. But she couldn't unplant it. She just couldn't let go of it. And I think that kind of connection to the natural world we're used to can be so profound. And I think it is for me. I was lucky to go to a school that was, you know, for grade school in the hills in Marin, and my parents sent me there, they said, because there was a creek running through it, and they just couldn't get me out of the creek when we went to visit the school. I mean, there was a creek running through my school, and we could catch tadpoles in little paper cups at recess and then set them free again, and all of that just was so magical. And to run around barefoot in the hills, it's just been a profoundly important part of my life. And way to balance out a lot, and I should say this too, a lot of other loss and grief. I spent a lot of time as a kid being very unsupervised and cared for by a father who was mentally ill, who was dealing with mental illness and alcoholism, and without other supervision when I was with him. So I could be 7 years old and just running loose in nature. I mean, quite literally, I remember he was camping for a period of months with me and my little brother as he was transitioning and trying to find where he wanted to live. I would get out of our tent at night and roam around the forest by myself when I was 7. And there was a deer that was pretty tame, and I would walk around the forest with her with my arm around her neck at night. I mean, I don't know. I don't even know what I'm talking about at this point. But I feel in some ways I was raised by those trees and animals for portions of my life, by horses, by riding bareback, by, you know, running through the poppies. I felt that the natural world raised me in that time. And luckily I survived and was not eaten by a bear or anything like that. But that's been how I see it. Like, poets and nature did a lot of my raising.
Thank you, that's great. What a mythical childhood. It's funny, I grew up in a rural area too, so like just a lot of walking through cornfields, and you know, at night you could just be like, well, I'm going on a walk.
Would you do that with the corn?
Not at night, but we had our house open onto like 40 acres or something of reservoirs, and sort of like, I'm from the Northeast, so it's a post-industrial landscape. So you had, you know, roads that used to be connecting the quarries to the town, and then they were overgrown and stuff. So, you know, you could wander around and look at the stars and stuff.
That's very cool.
Yeah, but I mean, you can feel the, I think you can feel that in your poems. Like, the nature is so lived, and it's braided in a way that you can only do, I think, in poetry, of like, you know, the suffering is right there. Just like you say, one wounds us into another. It's just, when did you find this voice developing? Like, from what you're saying, it just feels like a most natural emanation from your childhood to do this. But yeah. Yeah, why is it so magical for you? Why does it seem so easy?
I think, you know, for some people it comes really easy, and I like to say that often for the people to whom writing comes very easily, it is nothing, and so they just move on from it and play tennis instead, or, you know. I have a niece who's a much more gifted writer naturally than I was, and that's not her main path of life. So I felt that I did have to work a lot. I spent hours a day reading. I studied with Dorian independently. I didn't go to a master's program. I just spent time writing with her, and with the poet Ellen Bass, and with Dorian's husband, Joseph Millar. I just sort of was brought up writing with these poets. And so that was a big part of how I came to it. So it hasn't necessarily felt like, oh, this is so easy, I can express myself. Maybe it's even more. Okay, Craig Morgan Tiker wrote a book called, gosh, is it his book? I'm thinking of Dana Joya's Can Poetry Matter? And then there's Craig Morgan Tiker's book. I can't remember the title right now. But it's also about how poetry is or can be important or isn't. And he said in the introductory part, poets are people who at some point could not speak. I know, right? Could not speak, or maybe were not heard, right? It could be many things. I was so quiet as a child that I remember hiding under my desk at some point and just feeling painfully inward and unable to communicate. And I think that can be true of so many writers, whether or not it's true across the board, is that it's actually not speaking that leads you to speaking and trying to say exactly what you mean. And Maya Angelou, who lived in Berkeley and Oakland for many years, right? Was a partly local person and poet, writer, dancer, all the things. She was actually mute for a period of time in the aftermath of abuse as a child. She was completely mute for years, and then her voice. Have you heard her speaking or reading in recordings? It's like this big, enormous, low, and sonorous voice. I can't even embody it. It's just so powerful. And here she was, a child that did not speak. That's profound. But I have found it to be just a very slow climb of, I want to say this, but not quite that. I think I mean this. And one thing I've been telling myself lately, but also saying when I teach, is that writing is a process of failure. It's a beautiful failure because you're never going to be able to say it exactly. Whatever you're carrying, whatever you are struggling with, you can't exactly give it language. And so you do and you don't. Or like there's a beautiful poem by the poet John Murillo where he said, it's called Dolores Maybe, where he keeps telling this whole story about this girl he knew named Dolores, but then he says, except that wasn't her name. I don't remember her name, but I remember the dress she was wearing. He keeps going back, the poem, he keeps going back and forth to what's true, not true, I'm trying to say this, that wasn't the real story. And so we fail our way through it, and I see that as a kind of a sacrament. There's something beautiful about failing in this way. It's sort of a holy failure in which we are trying to say the thing the soul has to say, and there is no human language for it that is exact. And so we just accept more and more that trajectory. Like, oh, I will never be able to write a poem that is the same as the one that occurred to me inside. I can't get it to be on the outside. It's actually quantum physics is the issue. Because, right, when things are unobserved, they're waves, and they're loose, and they're infinite possibility. And as soon as we observe them in an experiment particle, and all those possibilities collapse down into this one point of data, and there goes the wave, there's the particle. And I think it's the same with any writing that you might be doing, essay or poem. You experience the wave when it comes through you, right? You feel like, oh my God, this is enormous. This is an enormous awareness. And you put it in words and it's like, dun, dun, dun. It just collapsed. But we get as close to it as we can.
Thank you. That was a marvelously poetic answer. And I think maybe that's sort of where I find what I hear in your work is there is an acceptance from like the beginning of the process of imperfection and failure. And like one of my favorite poems of yours is Remnants, where it's just like so many pieces of life that are brought together like beads, as you end the poem with. Okay, well, I can open it up to questions if people have some things they would like to ask. I don't know how we're doing on time. We have some people there in the back, some ragamuffins back there. Do you guys want to switch the mic back and forth? Okay.
Okay, sure. Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. All right. So, speaking of failing through it, so like, how long? I guess I know every poem is different, but in your process, like, how long on average does it take you to like compose a poem, and when do you know when you're like done with it?
Okay, start. Oh yeah, I should do the mic then.
Yeah.
It's like
It's okay.
early talk shows.
Yeah, I wish. I need to big my red frames, my Sally Jesse red
Oh my God, remember those? I can't believe that. Okay, so start to finish, and how long does it take? The funny thing is, some poems I just sit down and I write them, and maybe I change a line, but that is, and then it holds up. But that is so rare. It is so rare that I just go, okay, maybe that'll happen again years from now. But mostly what happens is I sketch something out, and I make my way through the poem on sequential visits, say over the course of weeks or months. And as soon as something happens that changes me a little bit in my perception, I go, oh, I have a draft. Because if I have been altered by the writing, I know I have something that could touch somebody else that way. And Horace said centuries ago, no change or no surprise. Yeah, I've changed it in my head already. No surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. But in my mind, that's no change for the writer, no change for the reader. So I want to be changed. And sometimes I've sat on a draft like that for 10 years. And sometimes I've given up, and then I go, oh, I'm now the person who can finish this. I have something shifting in me when I work on it. So that's how I know it's done-ish, is if I've been changed, or that's how I know I have a poem, I'll say that. And then there's all the mental stuff of, where we bring in the mind's accuracy to, are there extra words that can go out? I once had I workshopped with the poet Mark Doty years ago, and he said, I want to tell you this, take out 9% of your extra words. I don't know why he said 9%. Why not 10%? But I remembered it better that he said it that way. But taking out the extra words, looking at the form. Should this be in couplets? Does it even need stanza breaks at all? What's going on? And is the title helping or hurting? Titles are hard, so that's my very basic rubric. So I just kind of go through the mental checklist of what do I need to attend to on a craft level to polish it once I have been altered by the writing of it. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Enough? Okay. So anywhere from 5 minutes to a decade.
Hopefully for us working on our theses, it's more of a 5 minutes thing. Would be great.
You're hoping 5 weeks.
Yeah. All right, Courtney, I'm coming to you. Will you meet me in the middle?
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for sorry, I was going to walk you out there. So I speaking of, I guess, kind of craft, I had a question about questions.
Yes.
And because lately I've been curious about where and when I ask questions, like naturally, not when I'm in revision mode and thinking, should I put a question mark, or
Right.
should this be rhetorical, or should this be, sometimes you will posit a question as a statement,
Yeah.
like in the kissing disease, but then sometimes it's like a very integral in your face question, like in Glass. what doesn't in time enter grief's lexicon, which is like, whoa, yeah. So, made me pause for a while. So I was wondering if you were aware of your process of questions and question marks, and whether like you ever think, I'm going to be rhetorical here, or if that's something you'll naturally just do in your process.
Sorry. It is like old Oprah.
It's like old Oprah. Vintage Oprah. I like it. Okay, so the use of questions in poems, essentially, and how conscious am I of that? I'm conscious in the sense that when I first was studying poetry, my first poetry teacher, knowing we couldn't write poems yet, I was in high school, said, just make a bold statement, then ask a question you can't quite answer, and just go back and forth between those things in description. It was the funniest advice. It was like, just pretend you're writing a poem and keep doing that. And that's still how I'm functioning. That's still good advice. Just pretend. And that was some of the advice he gave us around pretending. And so I will find that when I'm at an impasse, I might just ask a question and then pull it in and then say something definitive. I think we like to sort of crunch on those different energies when we're reading a poem. Like, oh, I want the poet to seem really sure of themselves. And then I want them to say, I don't know what I'm talking about. That's the crack in the vase. And as Leonard Cohen told us, that's where the light gets in. So you want a cracked vase. And poems help us to crack the vase. And other things that help crack the vase are the thing I was saying about the Dolores Maybe poem. No, it wasn't that at all. Corrections. So questions, corrections, reversals. I sometimes am looking for where's the crack in the vase, and those are ways I find it. Now, as an aside, bringing this up to the editing phase of this book, I have a very fine editor over at Copper Canyon, that's Michael Wiegers, and we met on Zoom to talk about the book, which he had just reread with his own questions and edits. And he goes, Danusha, what's up with all the questions? What's up with that? There's a lot of questions. And I was like, I know, I want to have all the questions. But we looked at punctuation and took out some of the question marks so that it doesn't have to be a raised voice at the end of every question, because there is that balance where it can feel like, oh, I want the certainty. No, I want the question. And some of it is those kind of choices around punctuation, but I do think it's something, and I took out a number of the questions and changed them to statements, or I know in the earlier draft. It really wasn't that many, but it was a handful. And so I'm also playing more with that balance of when to ask and when to say. And yeah, I think that's what I'd say about that. Did you? Here, I'll be the Oprah.
Hi. So I, as someone who is neurodiverse in various ways, really connected with your statement that, like, a poet is someone who could at one point not speak. And something I've been thinking about and talking in and out of class with some classmates about is like this dichotomy, which is, in like most dichotomies, a false dichotomy between clarity and mystery. In what way do you think the fact that you've had to work hard at writing and mastering it has affected your perspective on clarity in poems?
Okay, that's like a master class question. I'll see what I've got. Thank you for asking. in what way has my sort of struggle or challenge in learning to write affected my relationship to clarity? Okay, it helps so much to say the question over, because then something appears in the mind. And for me, what appeared in my mind is that because I found my way through writing more in the narrative direction than pure lyric direction, in other words, I'm a storyteller more often than not, I realized that when I was reading other narrative poems, because part of my process of being largely self-taught was reading for like hours a day, like many of you do. And so I realized that to feel taken care of in a narrative, I wanted to know what I call the W's up front. Who, what, when, and where, reserving the why for later. And so that's what I discovered, that when I was reading again and again, someone would write a poem to bring to workshop, for example, and they're saying he, and on his deathbed, and I'm going, who are they talking about? So I'm not feeling, I'm thinking. And I realized that I want to be in a state as the reader of feeling, not going, what's happening? At least I don't usually want that. I like to say, once the reader is in the house of the poem, you can lead them to any room, but you want them to get in the house of the poem. So to get in the house, I want to know what street is the house on? Who lives there? Where am I? And I want that clarity from the work, but I realized that the clarity I did not need was the why I'm in the house. I want that to be revealed stage by stage. And I don't know if that process came to me through the struggle or the difficulty conveying my meaning, but I do think it's connected, because it's about really thinking deeply about what is the point of communication? What is the point of it? If it's hard to do, we all know it's hard to do. Anyone who's been in relationship to anything or anyone knows communication is so challenging. And so the answer of why it matters is going to be different in each context. But I thought writing to me was about being able to feel something and convey feeling. And to do that, I can't have my reader just feel confused the whole time. I can confuse them a little. I can lead them into the potting shed, and they're like, why are we in the potting shed? But I want them in the house. And so I realized what mattered to me was feeling, and also that sense of being altered or changed by it. And to enact that in my own work, I had to be clear enough that the reader is not lost and confused, except in moments. I call that productive confusion. When they're confused and that's the crack in the vase for a moment, it's like, oh my God, I don't know what's happening here. That's great, but I don't want them confused about everything, because then I don't have them in a feeling place. Does that answer?
Yes.
Good, okay, thank you for asking that.
Yeah, that was an incredible answer, because I think when you're learning to write, that's something that is the mystery. Like, how do I present mystery that you're feeling? Yeah.
And to add just a little to that, that is actually a huge thing that I see with students of mine, is that they don't want to put the who, what, when, and where early on in their writing, because they're like, but I want it to be mysterious. I'm like, let the mystery be the mystery, not who the hell is this about? Because then they're just distracted. That's not the mystery to your reader, and that's not really the mystery usually, right? And so we want to have space for the mystery to evolve and be revealed. Another thing Mark Doty said in that workshop years ago was, we write the narration to get to the evocation. And that was another thing, like his 9%, where I was like, what is he talking about? And then I would find myself writing a narrative and then getting to that lyric moment where time stops. And you're like, oh, this is the whole reason I'm writing this story, is to get to this moment. That's the evocation. What is it evoking? And that's where the mystery lives.
That's great, thank you. It's funny, I mean, we spend so much of our weeks and months like listening to, you know, just gibberish from all over information. And you listen to a writer for like half an hour, like once every 2 weeks, and you're like, oh. So this has been great advice. But does anyone have any other questions?
Hi. My question stems from a particular poem, Glass. These two phrases you use keep running through my head. Vocabulary of loss and Griff's lexicon. And I think my question is, this vocabulary of loss, you talk about it as the oranges and the Queen's Anne's lace, and is this vocabulary of loss, like, as you were also talking about, like the limitation of language, is it the space between what we want to say and what we are actually able to say, or is there a way that the experience of grief and loss has actually tangibly affected the way that you write and express yourself?
Thank you. Thanks again. I mean, what is in the water up here? These are such interesting questions. And so, talking about the vocabulary of loss and grief's lexicon, and how I mean those phrases, and how is it the distance between what we can and can't say, or is it that I'm experiencing loss through vocabulary? Is that kind of how I'm? There was the last part, it was a subtlety I might have missed.
Is there a way that, like, experiencing grief and loss has actually changed the way you write and the way you express yourself?
That's so interesting. You know, the poet Carolyn Forche has a whole essay or thesis. You know, here she is, this very acclaimed poet, and she decided to go do graduate and postgraduate work in her 70s. So she's writing a lot about how loss transforms language. And that wasn't what I was thinking about, but you might look up Carolyn Forche and her writings about that, because I think that's another really interesting thing, where she, of course, spent a lot of time in, I believe it was El Salvador, right? And under a dictatorship, and writing about how people were traumatized under that and how their language and expression changed as a result. That's a real thing. I think here, I can hold her if she's being fussy. She disagrees with what I just said. It's my dog, Pumpkin. She's upset by that in some way. I understand. So, sorry. I think for me, it was realizing that so many of my nouns had become altered as if they'd been steeped in the tea of loss. And so oranges, Queen Anne's lace, you know, just literally the words start to develop associations that are more nuanced or tarnished. It's kind of like over time, if you have a copper pot and it starts to oxidize, it starts to be changed by time and oxygen. I think we oxidize too. We're changed by time and breathing and just being alive longer. So things become bittersweet. Things become bittersweet. I think essentially that's what my meaning was there. All of these things get tarnished by time and the experiences of loss. Things that used to be very neutral. I mean, I can say tadpole because I loved tadpoles as a child and they keep showing up in my poems. But I can't say that without thinking about how frogs are sort of the canaries in the landmine in environmental change or toxicity in the environment. And so the word and idea of tadpole is a little tarnished in that way, informed, right, differently. So that's what I would say. Thanks for asking.
In case you haven't read it, you probably aware of, Devin Kelly wrote this beautiful essay about that specific poem, about fragility on his Substack. That is, do you know that?
No.
Oh my God, it's great. Okay,
Oh.
I'll make sure you get a hang of it,
Okay,
get a hold of it. Yeah. I think there's time for maybe one quick question if somebody has anything else, but otherwise we can hand it over to Pumpkin maybe, or Pumpkin's mom.
Thank you so much for being here and spending this time together. And if you have other questions for me or one-on-one, I'll be lingering for a bit with my friend, husband, and dog. And just thank you so much. I really appreciate this, and happy writing to all of you.